Chapter 3. There were 142 staircases at Hogwarts, wide, sweeping ones, narrow, rickety ones, some that led somewhere different on a Friday, and some with a vanishing step halfway up that you had to remember to jump. Navigating them as Draco Malfoy was proving to be more difficult than Harry had expected. Everything was familiar, yet unsettlingly different. He couldn't shake the feeling of being a stranger in his own life, because, well, he was. Doors that required polite asking to open, trick staircases, portraits who wandered off to visit each other. It was all the same Hogwarts, but Harry wasn't. He felt out of place in Draco's body, navigating Slytherin's reputation and relationships, all the while trying to avoid raising suspicion. The ghosts didn't help either. Nearly Headless Nick had always been a comforting presence to the Gryffindors, but now, as Harry in Draco's skin, he avoided Harry entirely. Peeves was no better, gleefully dropping things on Harry's head and cackling like a madman. Even worse than Peeves was Argus Filch. The cranky caretaker never needed much of an excuse to suspect Draco Malfoy of mischief, and Harry had to make sure he stayed under the radar. Just one wrong step, Harry thought bitterly, and Filch would have me locked in the dungeons. Filch's cat, Mrs. Norris, prowled the corridors, always one step behind, her bulging eyes scanning for troublemakers. Despite all the distractions, Harry still had to focus on his classes, even though now they felt like an extra burden on top of everything else. He sat through astronomy, herbology, and history of magic as though trapped in a fog, his mind constantly racing. The lessons were the same, but now he was surrounded by Slytherins who expected Draco's sharp wit and smug confidence. The wits part was easy. Much of the work and spells being taught was now stuff he could do in his sleep. But still, every moment was a balancing act, pretending to be someone he despised. Potions lessons took place down in one of the dungeons. It was colder here than in the rest of the castle, and the shelves along the walls were filled with jars of pickled creatures floating ominously in murky liquids. Harry, sitting in Draco Malfoy's body, could feel the tension in the room building as Professor Snape began roll call. Snape's eyes flickered as he reached the last name. "Potter," he said, his voice laced with an odd curiosity. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Harry's body, Draco sitting across the room in his seat. Draco, now in Harry's body, looked up with a confident, almost smug expression. Snape's lips curled into a faint sneer as he walked closer to Draco. There was something almost calculating in his gaze. "Ah, yes, Harry Potter," Snape said softly, his voice low and menacing. "I trust you are prepared for today's lesson?" His tone made it clear that he expected otherwise. Draco, in Harry's body, tilted his head slightly, his smirk deepening. "Of course, Professor," he replied in Harry's voice, exuding an air of arrogance. Snape's eyes narrowed. "Let's test your knowledge then, shall we?" The dungeon was eerily quiet as Snape asked the first question. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry, sitting in Draco's body across the room, tensed. Draco wouldn't know this, he thought, his stomach twisting. He waited, expecting Draco to stumble, but to his surprise, Draco's response was smooth and quick. "You'd get the draught of living death, sir," Draco answered, his voice calm and collected. Snape's eyebrows shot up for a brief moment, but his face quickly returned to its cold, calculating mask. "Indeed," he said, though it was clear he hadn't expected the right answer. His dark eyes gleamed with something like suspicion, but he pressed on. "Tell me, Potter," Snape continued, his voice dripping with challenge, "where would you look if I told you to find a bezoar?" Again, Draco's response was immediate, as if he had been waiting for the question. "A bezoar is a stone taken from the stomach of a goat. It can cure most poisons." The room was deathly quiet. Every student in the dungeon seemed to be holding their breath, watching the exchange between Snape and Draco in Harry. Harry, still sitting as Draco, could only stare in disbelief. He's answering everything perfectly, Harry thought. Snape's not going to like this. Snape's lip curled, his frustration barely concealed. "One last question, Potter," he said, his voice low. "What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "They're the same plant, Professor," Draco answered smoothly, "also known as aconite." Snape's expression hardened. His black eyes glinted as he stared down at Draco, clearly dissatisfied with how easily the boy had answered every question. The rest of the class was stunned, watching the exchange with wide eyes. Draco, still wearing Harry's face, sat there smugly, as if relishing the attention. Harry felt a surge of anger rising within him. "Of course Draco's enjoying this," he thought bitterly. "He's using my body to make himself look clever, and no one even suspects a thing." "Very well, Potter," Snape said at last, though his voice was cold. "Let's see if your brewing skills match your knowledge." As Snape turned back to the blackboard, Draco shot a quick glance at Harry across the room, a smug grin tugging at his lips. Harry clenched his fists under the table, rage bubbling beneath the surface. Draco was playing this game far too well, and Harry was running out of time to stop him. After potions, Harry trudged out of the dungeon, his thoughts swirling. Just as he reached the middle of the corridor, a familiar voice stopped him in his tracks. "You see how easy that was? Snape's class is going to be a breeze." Harry froze. It wasn't Draco's voice, but it was coming from his own body. Draco, now wearing Harry's face. His heart leaped into his throat. There he was, the real Draco, walking confidently down the hall in Harry's skin, flanked by Ron and Neville. The sight of it made Harry's blood boil. "Now's my chance," he thought, turning to face Draco, determined to confront him. "We need to talk," Harry said urgently, trying to keep his voice low so no one would hear the desperation in it. Draco, still grinning with Harry's familiar lopsided smile, paused. His eyes glittered with mischief, and for a moment Harry thought he might agree. But before Draco could respond, another voice rang out from behind him. "Why don't you go sit with your Slytherin bully buddies, Malfoy?" Hermione's voice was sharp as she walked up, arms crossed and glaring at Harry with unmistakable disgust. Harry's heart sank as he turned to face Hermione. The weight of her accusation, even if she didn't know it was him, hit him like a blow to the chest. She was glaring at him. Draco, with the same fire she'd always reserved for Malfoy, and he knew there was no reasoning with her. "I wasn't," Harry began, his voice faltering, but Draco cut in smoothly, leaning casually against the wall. "Yeah, Malfoy," Draco said, sounding far too comfortable in Harry's skin. "Run along back to your Slytherin friends. Don't want to corrupt the Gryffindors with your slimy presence." Ron snickered beside him, clearly enjoying the insult. Hermione nodded sharply, turning her back on Harry without another word, and the three of them walked off, leaving Harry standing there, frozen and fuming. He clenched his fists, trying to control the rush of anger coursing through him. "He's doing it on purpose," Harry realized bitterly. Draco was using his body, Harry's body, to isolate him, to make him seem even worse than he already was. Harry's blood boiled. He's playing this too well. It took every ounce of self-control Harry had to keep from lashing out. He couldn't afford to lose it now, not in Draco's skin. If he reacted, it would only make things worse. So he turned away, feeling the weight of Hermione's words like a physical blow, and walked off in the opposite direction. The week dragged on, and Harry knew he couldn't keep going like this. He had to come up with a plan, some way to confront Draco in his own body, and force him to reverse whatever they had done. But catching Draco alone, away from Ron and Hermione, was going to be tricky. It was on Friday, after another excruciating potions lesson, that an idea began to form in Harry's mind. Draco, his real body, wouldn't be able to keep up the charade for long. Sooner or later, he'd need to slip away, probably to the Room of Requirement, to continue whatever mission he had been working on. Harry could wait for that. But there was a more immediate option. Draco, like Harry, wouldn't want to raise suspicion by wandering around too openly, which meant there was one place he was likely to sneak off to alone, the bathroom. "That's it," Harry thought, his heart beating faster with determination. "I'll catch him in the bathroom, where no one else will be around." It was a simple plan, but it might be his best chance. Draco had always been careful to avoid the public eye when doing something sneaky, and Harry knew from experience that the second-floor bathroom, where Moaning Myrtle usually haunted, was often deserted. He would wait for Draco there, ambush him, shoot, even follow him around from class to class until he had to pee if he had to. The Slytherin common room was as cold and unwelcoming as Harry remembered from his second year. Hidden deep in the dungeons, it felt more like a crypt than a place where students were supposed to relax. The stone walls were draped with thick dark green tapestries embroidered with silver serpents, and the room was lit by flickering torches that cast eerie shadows on the walls. A low fire crackled in the ornate fireplace, but it did little to take the chill out of the air. The windows, narrow slits cut into the stone, showed nothing but the murky waters of the Black Lake, casting the room in a constant greenish glow. Harry, still inhabiting Draco's body, sat in one of the large leather armchairs by the fire. Across from him, Crabbe and Goyle were lounging lazily, shoveling sweets into their mouths as they chatted about the day's events. "Did you see Potter in potions today?" Crabbe grunted through a mouthful of Bertie Bott's every flavour beans. "He was so bloody smug, answering all those questions like he knows everything." Goyle nodded in agreement, stuffing a chocolate frog into his mouth. "Yeah, he was showing off. Snape looked like he didn't know whether to be impressed or punch him in the face." Harry forced a smirk, playing along with them. "Yeah, typical Potter," he muttered, trying to sound as dismissive as Draco would. "Thinks he's the best just because he can answer a few questions." But inside, Harry's mind was racing. Draco's shaking things up too much, he thought, his stomach twisting with anxiety. Answering Snape's questions like that? It's not something I ever did. People are going to notice. What's his game? The thought gnawed at him as Crabbe and Goyle continued their mindless chatter. "I should be worrying about this timeline more," Harry thought grimly, leaning back in the armchair. "But I can't just sit here and let him keep playing this game. If I don't do something soon, who knows what else Draco will change." Across from him, Crabbe snickered. "Bet Potter's feeling pretty proud of himself right now. Hope Snape knocks him down a peg next time." "Yeah," Goyle agreed, his voice thick with satisfaction. "Someone needs to put him in his place." Harry nodded absent-mindedly, but his mind was already elsewhere. "I can't keep pretending to be Draco much longer," he thought. "I need to stop worrying about the timeline being shaken and focus on fixing the mess Draco's already made." The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting an orange glow across the stone floor. Harry glanced around the room, noting the other Slytherins lounging nearby, all of them oblivious to the storm of thoughts raging inside his head. But how do I reason with someone like Draco? Harry wondered, his frustration mounting. Harry's heart raced as the possibilities ran through his mind. Does he have the time turner, or is he just playing with my life while he waits for something else? The thought of Draco wielding Harry's identity like a weapon made Harry's skin crawl. He had to get the time turner back. They had to switch back before it was too late. But the more time they spent in each other's bodies, the harder it would be to undo the damage. The fire flickered again, and Harry stood, his legs feeling stiff from sitting too long. He cast a glance at Crabbe and Goyle, who were still mindlessly chatting about the day's classes, blissfully unaware of the gravity of the situation. "I'm heading up to bed," Harry said abruptly, turning toward the staircase that led to the boys' dormitories. Crabbe grunted in response, barely looking up from his sweets. "Yeah, all right." Harry made his way up the cold stone steps, his mind buzzing with plans for the next day. He couldn't let Draco get away with this for much longer. The longer he stayed in Harry's body, the more chaos he could cause. As Harry reached the dormitory, he pushed open the heavy wooden door and slipped inside. The room was dimly lit, and the sounds of the other Slytherin boys settling in for the night filled the space. Harry found the bed labelled Malfoy and sank onto the mattress, pulling the thick green blankets over himself. Tomorrow, he thought, his jaw set with determination. Tomorrow, I'll confront Draco. I'll get the time turner and we'll fix this mess. With that resolution echoing in his mind, Harry closed his eyes, the weight of the day's stress pressing down on him. But despite the exhaustion, sleep didn't come easily. His mind was too full of plans, of worries, of what tomorrow might bring. Harry woke up the next morning in the Slytherin dormitory, still feeling the heavy weight of everything that had happened the day before. The dim green-tinted light filtered through the windows from the lake outside, casting eerie shadows across the room. For a moment he almost forgot where he was, until the unmistakable sight of Draco Malfoy's dormitory reminded him. Right, he thought bitterly, still stuck in Draco's body. Crabbe was already up, lazily pulling on his robes at the foot of his bed. Harry groaned internally. He knew he had to play along, but being around Crabbe and Goyle for too long was mentally exhausting. "Where's Goyle?" Harry asked, glancing around the room, noticing the other bed was already empty. Crabbe grunted as he shoved his foot into a shoe. "Already down at breakfast." Harry forced himself not to roll his eyes. "Yeah, of course he is," he thought sarcastically, "probably shoveling food down like it's his last meal." With a sigh, Harry grabbed his own robes and started getting dressed. He was eager to get this day over with so he could confront Draco and get the time-turner back. But as much as he wanted to fix everything, there was something nagging at the back of his mind, something he couldn't quite shake. He had a bad feeling about today. "Come on," Crabbe muttered as he headed for the door, Harry following reluctantly. "I'm starving." "Of course you are," Harry thought dryly. "You always are." They made their way down the twisting stone corridors of the dungeons, the greenish light from the walls reflecting on the cold stone. Harry could hear the distant murmur of students already bustling around the castle, preparing for another day of classes. As they approached the stairs, something seemed off. A group of students rushed past them, talking rapidly and casting worried glances down the hall. Harry furrowed his brow. "What's going on?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. Crabbe looked as clueless as usual. "Dunno," Crabbe mumbled, shrugging. More students rushed by, and Harry strained to catch snippets of conversation. He heard words like attack and petrified, and his stomach twisted. The buzz of excitement in the air had turned into a murmur of fear. Crabbe glanced at Harry, confused. "Should we follow them?" Harry hesitated for a second, but his instincts kicked in. "Yeah, let's go," he said, pushing forward into the growing crowd of students heading in the same direction. As they reached the main corridor, the scene unfolded before them. The hallway was filled with a large crowd of students, all gathered around something. No, someone. Harry pushed his way through the mass of bodies, Crabbe lumbering behind him. As they neared the center of the crowd, Harry's stomach dropped. There, hanging stiff and lifeless by the torchlit wall, was Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, petrified. Her glassy eyes were wide open in fear, her body frozen as if struck by some terrible spell. No, Harry thought, dread settling in his chest. This can't be happening again. Not now. The wall behind her bore the same horrifying message he had seen once before, written in thick, glistening red letters. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. Harry's blood ran cold. The same message, the same exact message he had seen in his second year. But this time it was different, because he wasn't Harry Potter. He was standing here in Draco Malfoy's body, watching as history seemed to repeat itself. Crabbe blinked at the sight, his face scrunched up in confusion. What is that?" Harry's mind raced. Students around him were whispering frantically, their eyes darting between the petrified cat and the ominous writing on the wall. Filch was already there, kneeling in front of his beloved cat, tears streaming down his face as he muttered in disbelief. This is impossible," Harry thought, his heart pounding. Draco did this. Draco opened the Chamber of Secrets. His mind spun, trying to make sense of it all. But how? Why? He scanned the crowd, his eyes searching for any sign of Draco, his real body, hoping for some clue. But Draco was nowhere to be found. He must have done this and slipped away, leaving the chaos behind. Students around them were growing louder, their whispers turning into nervous chatter. Harry could hear some of them speculating about the heir of Slytherin. The fear in their voices was unmistakable. Harry's heart sank deeper. What did I expect? He thought bitterly. Of course Draco would open the Chamber of Secrets in his first week. He's not just playing with my life, he's playing with everything. He stared at the message on the wall, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Draco had already gone too far. This wasn't just about them switching bodies anymore. This was about the entire school, the timeline and everything Harry had worked to protect. And now the Chamber of Secrets was open again, and the danger was real. Before Harry could gather his thoughts, the crowd of students hushed as Dumbledore arrived, flanked by Professor McGonagall. The headmaster's long robes swept the floor as he approached the wall where Mrs. Norris hung, his expression grave but composed. McGonagall's face, on the other hand, was tight with worry as her sharp eyes scanned the room, assessing the scene. Dumbledore knelt beside Filch, placing a gentle hand on the caretaker's shoulder before rising to examine the message on the wall. The silence in the corridor was palpable as everyone waited for him to speak. "Students," Dumbledore's calm voice rang out, "I ask that you all return to your classes. I understand there is much confusion and fear, but rest assured you will receive more information at dinner in the Great Hall." There was a collective murmur of agreement, but the students still hesitated. It wasn't until McGonagall gave a sharp nod and began ushering them along that the crowd slowly started to disperse. Harry, in Draco's body, turned to leave with the others, his mind still spinning with questions. As he made his way through the throng of students, he suddenly bumped into someone. "Oh, excuse me," Harry muttered, stepping back. Professor Quirrell stood before him, clutching his head with one hand, wincing in obvious pain. His turban seemed slightly askew, and beads of sweat trickled down his pale face as he tried to compose himself. Sorry, Mr. Malfoy," Quirrell stammered, his voice wavering as he massaged his forehead. His eyes flickered with discomfort, and for a brief moment Harry could see the strain etched into the man's features. Harry's heart sank, his stomach twisting with a sudden, horrifying realization. Voldemort, he thought, his mind racing. He's right here, in the school, and I've been too distracted to even think about it. Quirrell gave a weak, forced smile and hurried off down the corridor, still rubbing his head as if trying to ease some invisible pain. Harry stood frozen for a moment, the weight of what he had just witnessed pressing down on him like a stone. How did I forget, he thought, his heart pounding. I even saw Defense Against the Dark Arts on my schedule this morning, and didn't think twice about it. Voldemort's been right here all this time, and I've been focused on Draco instead. As the students around him continued to whisper about the attack, Harry's thoughts spun out of control. The Chamber of Secrets, Draco, Voldemort, this is all too much. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast.